Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. The first weekend of the 2023 season of the Overwatch League is now behind us. So let's dive in and let's talk about what happened last week, this past weekend. I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently this year. I'm not going to talk about each individual game like I used to do. It takes too long, and frankly, I don't really get to break down the things that I think are the most important enough. So what instead I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the week in general, how I did on my picks, my weekly record, my big pick record, that type of stuff. Then I'm going to jump into some headlines, the big stories that I think are the most notable from this past week, and then we'll close out looking at the standings. And that's going to be how I do things this year. We'll see how it goes for the first little bit. If you like it, if you don't like it, whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. But let's jump in first by taking a look at how I did on picks this week. This was a pretty good first week, all things considered. The first week is usually the toughest week to pick. This year is a little different, of course, with the Pro-Am and whatnot, but you can see my picks for the week here. Very good week for me, 15-1 on the picks. The only game I got wrong was the Dallas Fuel versus the Guangzhou Charge, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Both of the big pick games right. Score wrong for one of them, but score 100% correct for one of the other ones. So yeah, pretty good week for me, all things considered. Let's jump in and let's get started with the first headline, which is that the Atlanta reign over LA, and not LA, NA right now. They didn't play LA, but they are looking like once again a very strong team in the Overwatch League. If you consider the Pro-Am and the start of the 2023 season, so the 2 matches here and the 5 matches that they played in the Pro-Am, they've only lost 3 maps so far, and it were those 3 that they lost to the LA Gladiators in that Pro-Am match in the bracket play. So the Reign look very, very good right now. This meta should be one of the better metas for them. Obviously, when you have, Tracer and Sombra meta, and you have the best Sombra in the world, a really good Tracer, phenomenal Winston play, and an incredible support line that I thought really did look great this weekend. You can say all you want about the fact that they played New York, who I actually think New York, generally speaking, despite the poor week from them, played decently well. I think that there's clearly things to work on for that New York team, but they pushed Atlanta pretty well. I actually would argue that Atlanta versus New York was a closer game than Boston versus New York. So New York did do pretty well, but it's very, very clear that the Atlanta Reign kind of know how to win. They know what they want to do. They were very, very, very clinical on dealing with supports. They dove the supports. Halo had a rough game against the Reign. Vin Dame had a rough game against the Reign. Finn had a rough game against the Reign. So it's very clear they know what they want to do. They know how to do it. And with Lip there and on Sombra, it's very, very tough to find a ton of value against a Reign team that just looks so comfortable right now. We all knew they'd be one of the best teams. We all knew they'd look really, really good in the 2023 season, but they are looking incredible. Better than I think a lot of people expected. I don't think many people would have expected them to 3-0 the Shock. They looked better than the Shock, and a lot of people are, were on the side of the Reign in that game. If I look at the fan predictions, it was actually a 53.6% in favor of the Shock to win that game, and it was a 3-0 for the Reign. Super, super one-sided game for them, and it really is the team to beat right now, this Atlanta Reign roster. They look very, very good. They look very, very clean. They look very, very strong, and I think it's really tough to predict many other teams against them right now. They'll be tested again, obviously, next week. They have a game against the Gladiators. That'll be a good matchup. The week after that, they play Houston and they play the Valiant. So they have a couple tough games coming up, but right now they look like the team to beat. I'd be surprised, really, right now, if anyone's able to topple the Reign, because they look very, very good. But another team that looks really, really good right now is the Houston Outlaws, and they got their revenge against the Los Angeles Gladiators for their loss in the Pro-Am. and once again look very, very good. If you consider what the Outlaws have done as well, if you just consider the Pro-Am and the season, they've only dropped one game this season as well, and it was that game to the Gladiators. So Gladiators, a lot of fun, being the only team so far this season to beat both the Outlaws and the Reign. Outlaws not quite as dominant on that map score front as what you have with the Atlanta Reign, but the Outlaws still look very, very good, and them getting that big win over the Gladiators really does cement them as a very good team in this current meta. They look really good. It's a Winston dive meta. It's kind of what you would expect from them in a meta like this. You'd expect them to play well. You'd expect them to look like one of the top teams in the league, but they really do look very, very good, and Shu and Violet are firing on the front, so it's very tough to beat this Outlaws roster. They outclassed the Gladiators. They outclassed the Valiant. It was just a very good showing from an Outlaws team that we know is going to be good. And I think really the key for this team is how well they're able to work Gargoyle into this roster. I was not super concerned about what we saw from him in the Pro-Am because he wasn't with the team yet. He was still in Korea, but he's with the team now. And when he came in, they still look very, very good. So the Outlaws, to me, are another one of those teams up there with the Reign that just look like they're firing on all cylinders. So long as they can play Winston, it is very, very hard to beat this team. And it's shown that even a Gladiators team that was able to go to Shambhala Monastery, which is a very good map for them because they can play stuff like the Ramatra comps, which were kind of their bread and butter in the Pro-Am. It wasn't even enough in this matchup against the Outlaws. So the Outlaws, another team that look very, very good. Those two, when they do end up clashing, it's going to be a banger of a match. Certainly one of the games to look forward to in a couple of weeks. One of the games that I'm most excited about because they really did impress me a lot. And I think that when you have two teams like the Reign and the Outlaws firing on all cylinders, playing at their comfort, those are the types of games that are really, really exciting. Those are the best games. A lot of the best games in the history of the Overwatch League have been regular season games. You think about like that Shock Outlaws game to start the 2021 season with the massive shatter from... why can I not think of his name? I feel awful that I cannot remember the name of that guy, the tank player. But like that was one of the best games in Overwatch history. That was such a good game. Junggu, that's his name. That big Junggu shatter, right? So like regular season games oftentimes are really, really good. Those are some of the best games. They maybe aren't as memorable as those big tournament games because those are kind of when stakes are a little bit more on the line. But I'm excited for when that matchup comes up. But the Houston Outlaws really are looking like they're a very, very good team right now. And I think that there's a lot of excitement for this Outlaws roster. I think they're only going to get better from here. And I would not be surprised if we see an Outlaws Reign rematch. Obviously they haven't played yet this season, but I wouldn't be surprised if their match in a couple of weeks is not the last time we see them play this first half of the season. Let's move on to a bit of a more dark and a little more upsetting story for a lot of people, I think. The power of friendship, it falls flat this week. And I'm not just talking about the Toronto Defiant. I'm talking about all of these kind of great legacy contenders teams that have had tons of success in contenders going into the Overwatch League, whether it be in 2022, mostly in kind of 2020 and 2021. They did not have a great week. You think about the Shock, the O2 Blast team, barely scraped by against the Toronto Defiant, of course, the American Tornado guys, who had a rough week as well, losing to the Shock and then also falling to the Gladiators. The Shock also losing to the Atlanta Reign, Vegas Eternal, the Odyssey boys, all falling flat against the Washington Justice and the Florida Mayhem. And then, of course, the London Spitfire, the British Hurricane dynasty, if you will, also falling flat, losing to the Washington Justice and the Boston Uprising. So it's a very rough week for those teams that presumably have some of that pre-built synergy, that synergy you expect from them, might not actually be enough to get you over the finish line. And we don't talk specifics. I mean, the Defiant had to play two good teams, right? They had to play the Shock. they had to play the Gladiators. Those are two good teams. You can be proud losing games to good teams. They're not bad losses by any means, and they looked good in both of those matches. They were so close to beating the Shock. Shock beating the Defiant, big kind of pull themselves up by the bootstraps and really get that game win. But their game against the Atlanta Reign was not close. It was not a great matchup from them. The Eternal had a really, really rough week, both in-game and on Twitter. Let me tell you, it was not a good week if you are the Vegas Eternal. And London Spitfire had some moments. Even that game against Washington Justice, Kings Row, kind of a throw from the Justice, if I'm being honest with you. They did have a good map against the Uprising on Control, but the last 3 maps of that series were just pretty one-sided by the Uprising. So to me, I look and I just look at these kind of pre-built teams, if you will. These teams that should, in theory, have a lot of pre-existing synergy. It's not really doing the thing that you expect it to do, which is start off the season strong. These teams all are not off to the start you want. I think the Shock will be fine. I think the Defiant will be fine. And the Defiant, if I had to say of those 4 teams, I think they probably had the best showing this weekend. Even if they did lose to the Shock, they kind of made some mistakes down the stretch that ended up with that result. But I do think it was a very good look in general from the Defiant. So I don't think it's doom and gloom for the Defiant or the Shock. You look at who the Defiant have to play coming up. They have a game against the New York Excelsior. They have a game against the Florida Mayhem. The Mayhem game, pretty tough. New York, they should be the favorites to win that game. The Shock don't play next week, so that's good for them. And when they come back in a couple of weeks, they play the Justice, they play the Excelsior. So they should be able to get a couple more wins in that win column here in the next couple of weeks. But for the Spitfire, for the Eternal, especially the Eternal, it is going to be pretty rough based on what we've seen. Spitfire also and Eternal, neither of them play next week. They do match up on Friday, May 12th, when they'll play some games that week. The Eternal also play New York, and London play Florida. So certainly it'll be good to see kind of what those teams, the Shock, the Eternal, and the Spitfire, are able to do after not having to play next week. They have some time off to kind of regroup and kind of assemble and kind of really figure out what they want to do and where they want to go. But Pro-Am performances from the Eternal and the Spitfire especially don't really fill you with a lot of confidence, and the performances so far are not really looking great either. So maybe just grabbing a bunch of guys from one contender's team isn't the strategy that wins games. And you could say the same for the Dallas Fuel. They're a pretty big team filled with a lot of guys from Element Mystic, and even they are not invincible. But before we get into that, let's talk about the Seoul Derby or Seoul Bowl, whatever you want to call it. I like the Seoul Bowl. I think that's the most fun name. And that game did not disappoint. I would argue it was probably the best game of the weekend. It went the distance. It was a 5-mapper, as I expected. Bellisria officially on the team. Finally announced that a couple days before the game, or I think 24 hours before the game, they announced he was officially on the team. Seoul Dynasty were able to come up with the win. Very, very good series. If you could watch one game this weekend, I would honestly recommend this being the one. It was on LAN in Seoul, South Korea, so it was a really great game to actually get to see live Overwatch in front of fans. We didn't get to see that in the Pro-Am at all. We did, of course, get to see it in the Grand Finals, which is a really good series. So this was a good one to see, in front of the fans in Seoul, South Korea. And of course, we know now that the mid-season madness, the mid-season tournament, will be in Seoul, South Korea as well. So we'll get to see some games in front of the Seoul fans once again. But this game in particular was a really, really, really good match. I think both of these teams are firing on all cylinders. MN3 and Zest both look phenomenal. I thought Mag had a good series, which is saying a lot for a player that I've been pretty critical of so far. Winston is still his bread and butter. When he can play Winston, this team looks very, very good. Void came in for a map for the Dynasty. Bellisria played the majority of the series, but Void still looks really, really good, as some people may have expected. When he came in, I believe he played Sigma on Shimali Monastery and looked really good. Kind of cleaned up at the end of that series there. Prophet still looks very, very good. New Prophet, if you will, had a pretty good series as well. I think the support lines are definitely the most interesting parts of these teams, but they both stepped up in a big way. And so this is a really good game. There's no real criticism I have for the Infernal. They played well. The Dynasty played well. The Dynasty just played ever so slightly better and were able to kind of pull themselves over the edge and really kind of have a great showing in a series that was really, really good to see in front of the Seoul fans. I'm really glad that the Seoul fans got a good match too. We don't get a ton of live Overwatch at this point in time. So I feel like when you get games that are live and are in front of fans, you really want them to be the best games. We did see quite a few watch parties this week and last season, which is also always really nice to see. But there is something about games on stage in front of fans that is really, really special. So I do love that we got to see that in this game. And like I said, it was a great match with two teams that I think both look to be legit contenders in this APAC region. But I would say the bigger story coming out of the APAC region was the fact that the Dallas Fuel, the defending Overwatch League champions, not only lost their opening match against the Guangzhou Charge, they were 3-0'd, stunning defeat at the hands of the Guangzhou Charge, a team that, to be fair, I have been very high on going into this season. I placed them at number 3 in my APAC region power rankings because I view what they did last season during the time they actually played together in the second half of the season. This was an 8-4 team. They were very good. They were, as good, if not better, than the majority of teams by record in the league last year in that kind of second half of the season. So they looked very, very good. I thought they would look only better this year as you had more time to let Piggy kind of, grow into other things and become better on other heroes. They dismantled this Dallas Fuel roster. And I do think that this Dallas Fuel roster needed a loss like this because I don't think this is a perfect team. I have a lot of issues with this Fuel roster. I think they need another tank player. I think that if they don't get another tank player, they need to force stuff like Sigma or Zarya more. I don't think that they can really get away and win in this region with Hanbin on Winston. You got to be able to handle Gushui and Mag and Belisria now on main tank. As teams have started to add tank depth and add more tank heroes, Winston looks really good right now. You cannot get away with not being able to play Winston. It's that reality. I don't think their support line is nearly as good as what they had last year with Chio and Fielder. I think that Edison and Sparkle, though good, have some limitations. A lot of DPS lines do in the league. But when I think this team has struggles in other parts of the roster, where I think Hanbin is not going to be able to play everything, right? He got diffed by Piggy. And we rate Hanbin higher than Piggy, and Piggy looked a lot better. And part of why Piggy looked better, I think, is because Jimmy and Choi Siwon were firing on all cylinders. And Xerneas and Farway I rate higher than what you have with MCD and Blizz. And so, to me, this was just simply a case of the Charge, I think, pound for pound, might actually be better on enough places, or at least equal on enough places, and better in a very important spot, being the support role, then I think they are genuinely a threat in this region. I would argue that the two best support lines in the APAC region are Xerneas Farway and Monk Langsa. What order you want that in, up to you. I think Monk is better than Farway, but I think Xerneas is better than Langsa. How much better is really where it comes down to. But to me, this is a very good Charge team that looked very, very good. I think that they should, I think if they were to get a player like Gaga, who could be a really, really good ball, really good Winston player, could really give you that solid thing of here's what Piggy plays, here's what Gaga plays, this is how this team works. This team could genuinely be the best team in the APAC region if that is something they were to do. So this is a really good Charge team. When it comes to the Dallas Fuel, like I said, I think that they have some things to work on. I don't think that their support line looked particularly great in this game. I think that there are certainly some places that they can improve upon as a team. They lost two really big pieces of their success last year in Chio and Fielder, and now they're killing it with the Atlanta Reign, right? So this team needs to really figure out how to get the most out of this new roster, the most out of kind of what they have now. Tasmo said that right now they're looking to just kind of roll with the 5 they have, and if they need to add someone else, they'll kind of keep an eye on it. I think they'll probably have to bring someone else in at some point in time. I think it's too early right now to sound the alarms on the Dallas Fuel and go super doomer on them and think they're just going to, lose. They didn't play games in this region last year. They're not super familiar with these teams in this region. Next week is the key, or this week, I guess. They have a game against the Spark. they have a game against the Infernal. Spark looked really good. Infernal looked pretty good. If it's Winston meta, I'd rate Mag's Winston higher than I would Hanbin's Winston. So they could very realistically start 0-3. And if they start 0-3, they are going to have to really work out some of those issues and some of those problems they're having as a team. The benefit they have is that all 6 teams in the region do advance into the knockouts, or whatever I think it's the knockouts, whatever the thing where the Overwatch League teams, the contender teams compete is. But if it's a Winston meta and you have guys like Fate and guys like Dreamer and you have teams like O2 Blast who are really, really good in this contenders group, that is going to be a potential problem. When you're also going against someone like Marvel, who's a really good main tank, this is not a team that I feel as strongly about as I did going into the season as someone who placed them 2 in the APAC region. I think, generally speaking, I think they'll be fine. I think Rush is a good enough coach that he can kind of sort a lot of these problems out and fix his team up a lot. But I do definitely have more concerns about this team now than I did just going into the first week. They looked pretty weak. And if you are one for historical results, hey, shout out to the Going to Charge, who have still never lost a map to the Dallas Fuel. Why did I even doubt them? They've never lost to the Fuel. Surely that won't change this year. So that's really it for the headlines for week 1. Haven't talked about every team, obviously, but my goal is, as I kind of do these every week, I'll give more time to talk about some of the teams we didn't talk about yet, right? I didn't really talk a lot about the Spark. I didn't talk about the Dragons. I didn't really talk much about like the Excelsior, the Valiant, the Justice, the Mayhem, Uprising, Titans. There's a lot of teams that are really good. So hopefully next week, get to some of those teams. Not every team plays next week in the Western region, so I definitely have a little bit more time, or should have more time, to focus on some of those teams I didn't talk about this week. But let's real quick take a look at the standings for both of the regions. I'll throw them up for you here. You can see them. This is my thing. Sometimes the Overwatch League website's a little different. Right now, it shouldn't really matter that much. I have them, if there is a tie on record and map differential, I have it ranked based on head-to-head if they've played, which at this point doesn't really matter. And then I have it based on alphabetical order. So that's why the Outlaws number 1, the Reign number 2, but they're obviously top 2 teams right now. Justice, Mayhem, and Uprising all had very good weekends as well in the Western region. Eternal, Excelsior, Valiant, not a great showing from them this weekend. I think the Excelsior showed a little bit more promise than the other 2 did, but certainly some rough outings. Defiant, Spitfire also there in the bottom. And the Titans, Gladiator, Shock all sitting at 1-1. And then in the Eastern region, Spark, Charge, big weekends from them, 3-0s for them. And the Dynasty, of course, coming up over the Infernal. Dragons and Fuel sitting there at the bottom of the Eastern region for now. Unless you want to include the Hunters, who I do have there in case they do return. But they're kind of in their own little grayed out little prison until they can actually break out of the prison that is financial ruin. Woo! Anyway, that is really it for this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on any of the things that I talked about in this one. And if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this as we continue on with Owl content as the season progresses. But that is going to be all from me for today. Thank you once again. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.